Hi, welcome to tonight's lecture, The American Flag as Symbolism in Art. My name is Michelle Steffler, and this lecture was inspired by a book purchased at the Smithsonian Institute titled The American Flag in Contemporary Art. In 1777, the Second Continental Congress was discussing a new symbol, a new flag for our newly exerted independence from Britain. And so the Congress called this the new constellation. So with that, the canton of blue and white stars and red and white stripes sort of became the beginnings, the roots of our American flag. The American flag has three colors that are symbolic as well. The red symbolizes the hardiness and the valor of our military, and the white symbolizes the purity and innocence, and blue represents the vigilance or perseverance and justice. Here is a painting that was by an artist named Percy Moran in 1920. It's titled The Birth of Old Glory, and it's an interior scene of Betsy Ross, who is sort of a figure here that it's a little controversial. We're not sure if what role she played in the early beginnings of the design of the American flag. We have two young girls displaying the flag for George Washington, America's first president, and it's sort of an unidentified military officer here in the background. So let me give you a little bit of a background. In 1776, back then, flags were made in one of two ways. Since most flags had naval use, you could go to a ship's chandlery, a store that outfitted ships, and the chandler would contract a small sailmaker, a local sailmaker, or in many cases an upholsterer to make the flag. An upholsterer in colonial times had more functions than what we typically think of today. Besides working on furniture, they also made flags and other military equipment. This is where the legend of Betsy Ross comes into play. We know that Betsy Ross was an upholsterer who made flags in the Pennsylvania Navy. What we don't know is, did she really design the first flag? There's a great deal of controversy about this. In 1870, Betsy Ross's grandson was addressing a Philadelphia Historic Society and said that his grandmother told him she met with George Washington and others and designed the flag. So it's sort of an anecdotal story. Here we have a very famous piece of artwork, a painting that is done by the artist Emmanuel Lutz. It is titled Washington Crossing the Delaware, and it was painted 70 years after the American Revolution. It features George Washington in a warrior pose, standing in the boat with all of these men. This is the Continental Army. This is the night before Christmas. It's a Christmas Eve attack, December 24th, 1776. As you can see, it's very icy on the Delaware. And what's happening is there's sort of an excitement building. We're about to really, have one foot forward in this American Revolution. And as I said, this is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I'm going to fast forward. This was painted in 1958 by an artist named Jasper Johns. It's titled Three Flags. And this particular version is at the Whitney Museum in New York. It was created using encaustic, which is wax and paint. Let me back up and talk to you a little bit about what was going on in 1958 in our country. The Americans were in a recession brought on by World War II that lingered. Unemployment was over 7%. It reached, in that time, 5.2 million people. NASA was created. The U.S. Explorer, which was the first satellite, was launched. We were in a space race with the USSR. Some people don't really know what to make of this series of works that Jasper Johns created. Some people say it looks like some of a reverse target, like a bullseye. Some people say that it uses reverse perspective, meaning that in artwork, oftentimes what is away from the viewer and in the background is smaller. and what is larger is closer to the viewer. And this particular artwork, it is reversed, where the smaller flag is closer to the viewer. It was made on 3 pieces of wood, and it made a big deal in the art world. The painting made a dramatic splash when a gallery owner named Leo Castelli showed it in 1955. Again, a different version, but very similar. And it caught the attention of Alfred Barr, the director of the Museum of Modern Art. Barr was enthusiastic about the artist, but was afraid to buy the painting because he worried that the museum trustees would find it unpatriotic to use an American flag as artwork. He ultimately coordinated with Philip Johnson's purchase of the painting and eventually a donation to the museum. There were no protests, no raided exhibitions, no condemnation by senators or presidents, no lashing out. But you'll see that that isn't always the case with artists that choose to use their flag in their artwork. Gordon Parks was a photographer, an African-American photographer. And this photograph on the left what is called American Gothic. It's named after an oft-parodied, very popular painting on the right by a completely different artist named Grant Wood. But his painting that you probably have seen is also titled American Gothic. So this is sort of a parody. It's a comparison. It's an analogy, and it's really very eye-opening because it calls out social injustice. And this was a photograph taken in 1942. This is a woman named Ella Watson, and she worked for the Farm Security Administration. Her broom and her mop are very similar to the pitchfork that the farmer is using on the right in the American Gothic painting. She maintains her dignity, but Parks is a janitor, and she's doing janitorial work for an agency that is, at the time, actively racist and sexist. So you'll see that this is shows the indignity of a Black woman in her situation. At first glance, you might view this as a piece of artwork that has, it's pretty innocuous. However, I will tell you that it is painted by a female Black artist named Faith Ringgold. It was painted in 1969, and it says some very hard words here. The word die, D-I-E, is in the blue section, and then the N word starts from the bottom, N-I-G-G-E-R, as you go up. And she's really testifying to the reality of the enduring prejudice that African Americans have felt in the 1960s and beforehand, and racism that's still apparent in our society. A quote from Faith Ringgold, the artist: "I need to communicate my relationship with this flag based on my experiences as a Black woman in America." The artist has painted a flag that makes a literal message she and her community receive from the image of the official flag. And in her words, it's a relentlessly consistent message that police around the country continue to kill Black people. And that was evidently how she felt in 1969 and true to this day in 2020. Another piece by Faith Ringgold, who is the artist here featured on the left, is titled "The Flag is Bleeding," painted in 1997. And the red stripes are portrayed as dripping blood. In this painting, though, there is also blood dripping from a woman's chest as her 2 children cling to their mother, cling to her legs. The woman's face and majority of her body is set on a different plane that is behind the stars and stripes, but her children are not. However, by putting the woman of color behind the stars, it shows that at this time, the identity of women of color and people of color in general is obscured and not included in the symbol of unity. The lack of freedoms, the rights that the flag represents. The children are not behind the stripes because they represent a new generation. They're stepping forward, one of which people of color gain true equal rights. Moving towards the 1960s now, we have a man who was outraged when he saw the unrelenting atrocities happening in the 1960s in Vietnam. He began his career in New York City in the beginning of the 1960s. His name is Mark Murrow, and it was an exciting time in the art world. He was exhibiting stuffed and shaped canvases. He was exhibiting all over galleries in New York. As a protest to the Vietnam War that was deeply disturbing to him, he began a new series of work in 1965, which uniquely incorporated the American flag. This art represents the confusion, and it reflects the turbulence of this Vietnam era. On the left, we have a stuffed flag that is being draped like a punching bag in the middle of a room. It's an installation piece. And then on the right, we have a pillow of the American flag with a hand grenade. This work ignited an 8-year court case against the owner of the gallery, Stephen Raddick. In 1968, Mark was so fed up with fighting with the gallery owner over his particular installation art that he left the United States and worked in London, Paris, finally settling in Amsterdam, where I believe he still lives today. He never returned to the United States. In the 1980s, we have a very fun young man bursts onto the New York art scene. Originally, he comes from Kutztown, Pennsylvania. He arrives in New York as a young art student, and he begins to travel underground in the New York City subway system, oftentimes with chalk or spray paint. And when he sees an opportunity, an empty space, a blank area, Keith Haring decides to kind of graffiti it with these figures that have no gender, but are usually dancing, moving in some way, as accentuated by the black lines outside of the body, these sort of comics. And some of his artwork was he was very interested in social justice and gay rights, equal rights for all. This particular flag that I chose to use was used for the American Music Festival, sponsored by the New York City Ballet in 1988. And as you can see, it's people dancing and moving, having fun, liberated, using the American flag as a backdrop. Sadly, Keith Haring died of AIDS in the late 80s, but his artwork still is very, very vital today. It's used often for charity works. He's very free with his copyrights. The next artist I'll talk about is Barbara Kruger, and this is titled Untitled Questions. It's painted in 1991, and it really shows her preoccupation with the ideas of power, feminism, and consumerism. She uses red and blue blocking and white text. Her piece creates an alternative image to the American flag. The question, as in her title, she elicits is such as, who laughs last? These questions are accusatory and profound in their simplicity. It has the feel of propaganda and forces the viewer to be critical. She loves touching on the themes of patriotism, sexism, fascism, war, prison reform, community activism, and democratic participation. She asks ethical questions about what happens to whom within the power structures of the United States. Here's another untitled piece by a different artist named Robert Longo. This is an installation piece that was created in 2014, and it's also alternatively titled The Picard, which is a reference to the book, the Melville's famous Moby Dick. It's 17 feet tall and it's comprised of steel, wood, and wax. It's a massive sculpture. I want you to look carefully at the color of this, the angle that it is displayed, and how it's cropped. This was named after Melville's doomed whaling ship Moby Dick. The artist Robert Longo has said that he feels the United States is terrible in its decision making, and he wants to reflect the senseless death that he sees when we are at war. So this is his reaction. This is his feeling, and he uses the color, the angle, the size to show sort of a sinking display. This is titled White, and it's by an artist named A.A. Bronson. It was created in 2015. It was created after the Twin Tower attacks on September 11th, and it has this chalky coating on the white flag, which bears a resemblance to the dust and debris that covered Manhattan after September 11th terrorist attack. This artist, his name is Dred Scott. He created sort of an interactive piece in 1989, and the title of it is "What is the proper way to display a U.S. flag?" He invited viewers, gallery patrons, to write their thoughts regarding how to display the American flag in a blank book. However, in order to get to the book, you had to walk over the flag, which was deeply disturbing to some people. And hanging above the book was a picture of South Korean students burning the American flag and holding signs saying, "Yankee, go home." John O'Donnell is a very unusual performance artist. This is titled Red-Blooded American, and it was his performance. This particular performance was in 2017. The performance is about representations of an arrogant patriotism in America. So here's how it goes. This performance follows a 3-act structure. Act 1, there's ambient sound, ambient music, calm. The performer is costumed as a teenager as he enters, transfixed by handheld devices, blind to the audience. Act 2, the music changes and Jimi Hendrix' Star-Spangled Banner starts playing. The teenage costume is removed and the performer adorns himself with a red and white ribbons. He performs a series of actions sharing USA paraphernalia with the audience, specifically the children present. Act 3, the music changes again, and Black Sabbath's song Paranoid comes on. The performer actually stands up, he transforms. And this is John O'Donnell has created this installation piece to show his feelings about the ever-changing United States, the sacrifice that has been given for our freedoms. Brian Kenny, in 2012, created this piece called Deconstructed Flag. In an interview with Huffington Post, Kenny says, "I feel discontent with the current political and economic system that allows for so much corruption and social injustice. I wanted to express this discontent in my art, so I learned how to sew, and I made a series of deconstructed American flags with fallen or removed stripes." The nature of Kenny's work is that we recognize the forms, and the familiarity haunts us with tension and disorder. He takes on marital rights, conjugal rights, housing discrimination, blood and tissue donation prohibition to the gay population, and visitation and medical care rights for gays. So he's taking on quite a lot of of inequality and social issues. And he shows us that by deconstructing the flag, which is our symbol for unity, a symbol for the anti-chaos. And within that, Kenny creates chaos. Here's a very popular and famous artist named Shepard Fairey. He's a street artist and a political activist. You might know him from President Obama's poster here, a screen printed poster that he created. He uses inverted colors of the stars and stripes with drips, and each star has a different image impressed on it. So, is it a representation or is this a flag? Think about that. Is this a representation of a flag or is this a flag? Shepard Fairey has stated that the Earth is very worried about the future. The Earth is out of balance, and the 7 billion of us humans better come up with a means to sustain our existence on this delicate planet. When everything comes apart, people grab at the shards of their world and attempt to reassemble a recognizable picture. The question is whether the pieces can ever be restored to a familiar whole. Here we have an artist named Cunha who describes this sculpture as the pregnant flag, and it symbolizes political expectations and the mysterious, quote, delivery of the 2012 presidential election. The bubble wrap is as repetitive as the design and signifies the contemporary pursuit of accumulation of power. Unsustainable consumerism is symbolized in the plastic. We have a really popular artist here started in the 1960s and lived until 1987. His name is Andy Warhol. He's a pop artist. He was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and he's Polish. His original name was Andy Warhola. He moved to New York City to be a shoe designer and a commercial artist, and then branched off and is most known for creating silk screens of repetitive images, sometimes celebrities. He's wrapped in the flag here, painting the flag, which in itself is provocative because you're not really supposed to be wearing the flag, and he's actually painting the flag on him. This photograph by Andy Warhol was taken in 1981, and on the right, and it's loose grapes. That's really what it is, are grapes, and it's both childlike and also abstract. But it's a symbol. So just because of this cluster and these rows, we understand that this is a symbol for the United States flag. And then on the left, it's the astronaut that placed the flag on the moon. So Andy Warhol creates this image, the silk screen, and then goes back and sort of colorizes the image with these bright colors, which he's very known for. Vic Moose did this very creative piece in 2009. It's titled "The American Flag." And what he calls it lies at the heart of his work is the perpetual, quote, perpetual bottleneck. And here's what he means. In this work, the viewer needs to switch back and forth they need to choose, are you going to see a subject, which is the flag, or the substance from which it's made of, plants? So do you see plants that make up a flag, or a flag that is made up of plants? He's sort of playing with you about whether or not it is just plants or is it a flag? Can it be both? This particular artist, I thought this is very creative. He was a finalist in Smithsonian's 10th annual photo contest, Americana, in the year 2013. His photograph shows an image of the American flag as lit up on a billboard, distorted along the surface of 3 kind of glossy cars here. So this billboard bearing the American flag caught the photographer's eye during a Thanksgiving visit to New York City. Using his Nikon D200 camera, this artist then designed waited for an adjacent traffic light to change 4 times. He was getting honked, 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 but he waited 4 times before he could successfully capture the light of the billboard reflecting off the moving cars below. Here's an artist, and I'm wrapping up. We have a few more to go. This particular artist, Dave Cole, created his piece Memorial Flag, also known as Toy Soldiers. And Cole created what he considers an actual flag rather than an artistic representation by melting together and then painting 18,000 toy soldiers armed with their guns. The soldiers of the type that most every American boy learned to play and fantasize with growing up in the 20th century. So he takes a visual representation of America, which is the fighting soldiers, he melts them down, merges them together into an artistic representation of the flag, or is it an actual flag? Childe Hassam is a New York artist in the early 20th century. This is titled The 4th of July. You can see it's a military parade along New York City's avenues during World War I. A lot of patriotism shown here on Fifth Avenue. He was known for these sort of impressionistic cityscapes. He's noted for his urban and coastal scenes in the 1880s. He found a studio apartment on Fifth Avenue and 17th Street that had a view that he painted in one of his first New York oils, titled Fifth Avenue in Winter. The fashionable street was traveled at that time by horse-drawn carriages and trolleys. It was one of his favorite paintings and exhibited several times. It skillfully uses a distinctive dark palette of blacks and browns, which you don't see normally in the strict impressionists. They sometimes call it forbidden colors, but he does create this very interesting scene. Tom Wesselman in 1964 created this piece, Still Life number 36, which is a gigantic oil and collage on canvas. He was a leader in the American pop movement, rejecting abstract expressionism for hyper-realism, the real American lifestyle, the American diet, the American consumerism during that time. And this piece is at the museum in New York, the Whitney Museum. He creates collages and assemblage, incorporating everyday objects and advertising graphics in an effort to make images powerful. Felissa Vandenberg grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. And this artist calls it the Rust Belt metropolis, combined with Southern make-do perseverance. And she says it had an enormous impact growing up here on her artwork. The repetition is the predominant motif, reminiscent of an assembly line, manufacturing from her Detroit origins. But this is combined with the handmade or women-made crafts that she creates. Nationalism, particularly in the U.S., motivates her work and questions the notion of homeland and how national identity intertwines with individual identity. Roy Lichtenstein was another pop artist based in New York in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. One of the pieces that I wanted to show you tonight is titled Forms in Space. It's a silkscreen, and it's the American flag, but changed up using primary colors, bold, bright stripes, and dots. In fact, the dots that he's using are called Ben-Day dots. And this is a printing technique that was used in newspapers at the time. It's visible here on the lower right with the female in her face. You might be able to see on your screen these little tiny dots. Well, clustered together, they kind of create an optical illusion that she has a skin tone, that she is pink or she is light pink. But in fact, if you were to get close to your screen, you would see a collection of tiny dots. And so he's kind of playing with that process, that technique that he used often in his pop art. He's playing with that here in the canon of the blue and white stars. These are scenes of everyday American life, highly graphic, comic book-like, with high contrast. Michelle Pred is a very interesting artist. Her piece here on the right are lighters that you would buy, in a dime store. Her examples include her exploration of intersection of personal space and security. So here she uses airport confiscated items after 9/11, and she takes these lighters and forms them together to create this gigantic, piece, this display piece of the American flag. So within the mass, we can also see the individual. Some of her pieces, she's used thousands of expired birth control pills, and her images really continue to tap into the inequalities that America is continuously trying to fight and to equalize. The economic and political struggles for women's rights. And here's another example of Michelle Pred, where she uses these knives that are all taken by security at the airlines, and she collects them together and creates this United States flag. Here we have a very creative young woman based in North Carolina. Her name is Christine Rebek, and she is a wardrobe assistant for Cirque du Soleil. In addition to that job, she creates her own installation pieces. You can see she's sitting on the floor with a sewing machine, and she created this entire flag out of bread and American bread, white bread, and hot dogs. Can all things be preserved, or will they naturally change? She uses this plastic and seals them in, but inevitably they will rot. She uses something called visual satiation, and it's a noun when an image is repeated so many times that it loses its meaning. Or perhaps, as Christine says, perhaps it's given a new meaning entirely. Think about that for a second. When an image is repeated so many times, does it lose its meaning? Or perhaps is it given a new meaning entirely? Angel Schultz in 2012 created this piece. There's elements of chaos and destruction, reflecting a perspective on the current political, environmental, climate change issue. There's 3 layers of distress and destruction incorporated into the design. The flag itself is worn. The colors are dark around the edges, and it seems scuffed up or beaten, as if a symbol for what the United States is going through. My last artist is Tom Torlapin, and Tom is an Indiana-based artist. He's a contemporary artist. His practice spans 30 years. He's known for using lots of different mediums, and he's known for his no-holds-barred approach to subject matter relating to socio-political, ethical, and humanist themes. This one is titled American Eye Pull-Up Bar, and it's from 2016. It's in the Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art in Chicago, and it's acrylic. There isn't too much information about this, but I'll give you a minute to ponder it yourself until I show you his last piece. Tom's is last piece is here, and you can see if you look closely on your screen, you'll see the red stripes. Well, the flag is manipulated; it is changed in orientation, and the red rose, the red stripes, are people figures that are marching forward on line towards the blue, and the blue are unhappy stars. Within the line, you can see that there are disabled people, people holding children, holding others, walkers. So it's a very telling piece on Tom's view of what is happening in the world now, the state of the American society. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I find art history endlessly fascinating, and as I hope that you enjoyed tonight's lecture, thank you again for your time, and good night.